Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, a look at Iowa politics. We go over farm needs, investments, water quality, and expectations with State Auditor Rob Sand, who's running for governor. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we're going to have a conversation with the State Auditor of Iowa, Rob Sand, also a candidate for governor here. Rob, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to chat with you. And let's just jump right in. Can you tell me a little about yourself? We do talk farm here, so do you have any farm background or do you have any relationship to the farm?
Sure. Yeah, happy to be here with you, David. Thanks for having me. My dad's joke, I guess. So I grew up in Decorah. I was a town kid, but his joke was always that he farmed for 6 months because his parents moved off the farm when he was 6 months old. So town kid personally, but my first job was actually catching chickens, technically capons for Wapsie Produce. If you don't know the difference, I'll assume that this is polite company and I won't explain it. But I started doing that when I was 14. And obviously most folks probably understand this, but that wasn't like Rocky chasing the chicken around for training. It was in huge barns, pulling up on a giant truck and turning off the lights, grabbing all the capons and lifting up to the guys on the truck. And you'd go until as many trucks as came were full. If you didn't have very many people who came along, that meant you had a lot more work to do. But you were just there until the job was finished. So I had an early start in ag, I suppose you could say, in that regard. And worth adding to that, my wife's family's business is ag related. LGI, they're in Ankeny. They make pet food, soup stock, soup broth. They've got a rendering plant. So they're all over Iowa doing that kind of stuff as well. But happy to be here with you. Happy to be talking about what's a really crucial industry in the state of Iowa. 25% of the world's grade A farmland. This is where it happens.
I think that your story there is very important to Iowa as a whole because our economy is so dependent on agriculture and the farmers that we have. So as someone who also was a town kid, whose first job was also doing some basic ag things, I was just germplasm security at Pioneer in Johnston and just going down measuring rows of corn, essentially. So I think a lot of us have that background of something agriculture related. What's then the important point of agriculture as a candidate for governor here? What do you focus on when you try to think of that aspect of our economy and that demographic of our producers?
Well, I think the bottom line is we want prosperity. I mean, if agriculture is doing well in the state of Iowa, everybody is doing well. That means our towns are doing well. That means our small business owners are doing well. That means our public schools are doing well. And so we want to focus on ways to make sure that agriculture is resilient in the state of Iowa and prosperous. There's a lot of different pieces of that. Certainly, I do think that one of the challenges we're facing is what's going to happen with the transfer of Iowa farmland, as so many of our landowners are getting up and long in the tooth, as you might say, and getting hopefully getting that land into the hands of other Iowans who are here, who want to be here, who want to be out farming, growing, and producing. I think that's a big challenge for us going ahead. But generally speaking, it's, look, how can we make sure we're being prosperous?
I tried to stay pretty apolitical as a broadcaster. So I'm going to try to describe how I think the generalities of what's known as opposed to if you actually believe it or not. And so I think a generality is the Republican Party is known as a party of small government etc. So that's is pretty popular among small towns and small communities. While Democrats are more known for imposing some regulations of sorts. And that is the perception that is seen in rural America, once again, regardless of if you think that's actually true or not. I think I've seen a couple members of the Democrat Party, which is the party that you are involved with in running for governor, make a shift towards saying essentially the government, it's important to have protections from the government, but they're not the only ones who can limit freedom. And is that kind of an angle you're taking when you're talking about that, in terms of that's what folks should really view regulation as, is helping protect people from companies or industries that are too big for them to handle?
I guess I'll step back because once we start talking politics, I want to help people understand my approach to it. I don't really like political parties. There's more than two ways to think. And when we pretend there's only two ways to think, it's when we lose all ability to reason. And it's when we lose the ability to, frankly, hold elected officials accountable, because too many people, both in both parties, they're not concerned about anything other than, oh, I'm going to vote for this party. And that enables that party to be corrupt. It enables them to be greedy. It enables them to be lazy and not solve problems. My bottom line is, I don't think that either the Democratic or the Republican parties solve enough problems to deserve a monopoly on our choices at the ballot box. I think that we have seen some problems in the state of Iowa, primarily gutting the auditor's office, literally making it harder for the auditor's office to find misspent money, right? And that sort of thing results from 10 years of one party control. But if you are thinking that all those problems are just because it's the wrong party that had 10 years of one party control, you should visit California or New York. Right? This is a human nature thing. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when the auditor's office in our first term, we found a record amount of misspent money, and their response to that after I get reelected was to make it harder for us to find misspent money, then something's wrong. Now, I don't like political parties. I registered as a Democrat because you have to pick a party in order to vote in a primary in Iowa. That's wrong. Here we are in a country that celebrates Independence Day, and yet we tell independent voters that they're less equal, right, than the rest of us. And so I look at this situation and I say, well, yeah, I'm a registered Democrat, but I didn't leave my independent mind behind. I registered as an independent when I first registered to vote. My heart is still in the idea that we should think for ourselves. So this is an interesting issue, an interesting point to look at this from, because I actually am a believer that the government that governs most locally, typically, and this is a complicated issue that we could talk about the rest of the day, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Typically, the government that governs most locally governs best. And yet, the party that's supposed to be the small government here in Des Moines, the party of small government here in Des Moines, has continually been restricting home rule. They have continually been restricting what cities and counties can do, and continually been restricting by adding unfunded mandates onto what local government can do. So my tendency is, let's talk issues, let's talk facts. When you try to say this party's that and the other party is this thing, I think it all just falls apart, because I don't think that that's really true. I think at the end of the day right now, people in both parties are just too focused on cheering for a team, and rather than actually figuring out what the truth is and what's right.
With that philosophy in mind, then, and going back to the earlier question, let's change it to, let's talk about the nuance then of how do you involve accountability for local, smaller versions of government, accountability for larger versions of government, and accountabilities for all the agents or possibilities of influence on freedom that include companies and use of land and all of that. How do you balance all of that, involving that Atkins quote that you used of power corrupts, where he also mentions, we shouldn't give too much grace to king or pope?
Yeah. Amen. um, I guess I would say this. I mean, part of the problem right now is there's not enough thinking. There's too much reacting. And when we don't have real choices at the ballot box, when we feel like we're kind of trapped between, well, you haven't done much for me lately, but on the other hand, you're scary. It's hard for us to really get good results on anything. And so our problems compound and manifest, and we get angrier with each other because we're just being told, well, all the politicians have figured out it's easier to demonize your opponent, and tell people that they're trash than actually solve the problems. So the regulatory question to me is it always is fact dependent, right? Because I can't agree either with the people who say, oh, the answer on regulation is more, or the people who say, oh, the answer is always less. And an interesting way to think about this, I think, that is, what would basketball be if we didn't have all the rules, right? It'd be MMA. Every sport has different rules because they want to create a different sport. And it's really fun to watch basketball. I like watching football a little bit more, but same answer. You've got to have different sets of rules depending on what it is that your goal is and where you're trying to get to. Sometimes that means more, sometimes that means less.
Let's talk policy then from a local Iowa perspective. What is farm or ag policy you would like to see if you were elected governor, or if you were working with the parties that were in control at the time, say it's Republican or Democrat? What would be the points you would like to advance?
Number one, well, and maybe this isn't in order, but I can think of two off the top of my head. And we should certainly be making sure that every single producer or grower that's signing up for conservation measures is getting funded. Those cost share issues are really important. And it's frustrating to me to see politicians refuse to fund those at the level that farmers are asking for them, right? I have a lot of people come to me. I'm doing 100 town halls this year. If you're listening and you want to come out and listen, robsand.com/events. You can come have an opportunity to hear me. Everybody's welcome, and we're having very good mixed attendance of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. Most of the time, there's somebody who asks me about water quality. And I always remind them, farmers want to do a great job with conservation, but oftentimes the cost share for what the programs are that they're signing up for, they run out of money before all the people who put the effort into putting in applications, to putting together the paperwork, before those folks actually get the funding that they want. So that seems to me to be the bottom line. I think that would be a really good thing to do. We should be making sure that the people who want to implement more practices and just are asking for a cost share have the freedom, right, to do that. And then I think I'd go back to number two. I mean, I just long term, right? We're supposed to be here as stewards for the brief time that we have. I am worried about a future where a lot of this farmland in the state of Iowa gets gobbled up by private equity firms, gets gobbled up by foreign interests, and Iowans are left not owning Iowa. I do not like that idea. And I think we need to be thinking creatively about many different ways to make sure that Iowans can continue to own the state of Iowa.
I think another issue that impacts Iowans very deeply, but is hard to control, especially as governor, is trade. We are very export dependent here for our crops, and nationally, when Democrats were in power, there was not an emphasis on trade a few years ago. Right now, the Republicans have an emphasis on trade, but they're also implementing tariffs, which are hurting farmers quite a bit. How
Yeah.
do you approach trade from a state level?
But bottom line for me is I want to represent Iowa. You can't quite see it, but over there it says Governor for, and over here it says all. I want to be a governor for all. That means if the president is another party and they're doing something that's good for Iowa, I'm going to want to do stuff that's good for Iowa. But if the president's in another party and doing stuff that's bad for Iowa, I'm going to say, hey, this is bad for Iowa. This so trade is a piece of that, absolutely, right? And we knew this was coming, right? We just China built the biggest single deep water port on the planet in Peru during the first round of tariffs in the first presidency for Donald Trump, because they figured, okay, if this is what this is going to look like, then we need to have an easier way to access Brazilian products. And It's like last time around they built the spigot. That means this time around all they had to do is turn it on. That's bad for Iowa. It's bad for Iowa farmers. It's a reason that I think we're under break even right now for a lot of farmers in the state of Iowa, and we should be standing up against that. But this is part of this is the problem that I'm talking about when I say that people are so focused on partisanship rather than public service, right? It's not just the tariffs. And God bless Chuck Grassley. He was one of the only ones who was willing to say, this isn't going to work. Everyone else is just cheerleading. And then when the president said, hey, Coca-Cola, I want you to start using real sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup, that's bad for the state of Iowa. That's bad for Iowa corn growers. It doesn't have a meaningful impact on health. But nobody out in D.C. representing the state of Iowa, the corn state, said it stuck up for the corn state. And that doesn't make sense to me. Come on. Represent the people that sent you there, not your party.
Absolutely. That did receive a lot of criticism from statewide commodity groups as well. I know you have to go here soon, so I want to just ask one important question I think is on the minds of a lot of farmers when it comes to the state level of governance. And that is, you mentioned it before, water quality. Do you think that our current voluntary system is working for where farmers are able to implement conservation practices to the level of which we are able to continue pushing as long as we continue funding? Or is that something where you think there needs to be more oversight?
Well, let me put it this way, right? We had half of Iowa's beaches close this year. Now, we also have seen the legislature, again, politicians, literally making it harder to figure out to what degree there's a water quality problem. I do believe we have a water quality problem. I think most people can look at what is reported in the newspaper and know that. And yet, the legislature defunded 500 water quality monitors that would help us figure out what the issue is and where it is. They went from, in addition to that, from 80 nitrate monitors to 20. So I think we do have a water quality problem. What does that mean about the approach that we take to resolve that? I'm sitting down, I'm listening to people, listening to commodity groups, listening to farmers, listening to folks kind of on every angle of this, because I want my approach not to be a political one that just is sort of taking somebody's plan off of a shelf on my side, so to speak, and waving it around and saying, this is what we should do. But I spent 7 years as the chief public corruption prosecutor in Iowa, 2 terms as the state auditor. Those are both really fact-based jobs. And I want to listen to folks and hear what they have to say and figure out something that is achievable, right? And also impactful. That means that it's going to be something that most people can look at and say, yeah, that's a good idea. That would make a difference and I can support it. I think there's a lot of back and forth on the idea of voluntary versus not voluntary. I really think that we should just be focused on, well, what is the situation? The situation, I think, is that we have a water quality problem. And then what is the solution? Sitting here today, I've got more work to do on figuring out that, having a lot more conversations. But before this campaign gets too close to election day, we'll come out with a plan. And if folks want to talk to me about that and share their opinion, please reach out. robsand.com is the website you can visit. Again, this is something I want to listen to people and hear their perspectives about, because I want to be a governor for all. I think that means making sure that we can have an incredibly prosperous and resilient agriculture system in the state of Iowa, where we are the #1 ag state in the country. And also we can have clean water. And I think that the people who tell you that we can't have both, they're really just trying to divide you. They're trying to divide us. And look at where that has gotten us. It's not good for us. That to me, I want to add too. I mean, a lot of this comes down to me as to a question of faith. When I was growing up, we were in church on Sundays. I've got an aunt that does religious artwork, an uncle that was a pastor. My second son, actually, his name is Axel, because when my wife suggested the name, I finally did something smart, which is that I thought, I don't like that name, and that I kept my mouth shut.
Right.
I looked it up in the big Scandinavian book of names that we're using, because I'm mostly Norwegian and she's mostly Danish. And it turns out Axel means father of peace. I immediately thought of the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and I knew I wanted to name him Axel at that point. So this to me is it's the right way to approach this. We're supposed to try to get along, and I see far too few people in politics making any effort to get along with people, and way too much shouting. We need to do more listening and more collaborating.
I appreciate your candor. Rob Sand is the state auditor for Iowa, as well as a candidate for governor here. Rob, thank you so much for your time on Farm Your Daily.
Yep, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Happy to come back too.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.